Premium Media's Mining Weekly is interviewing Dilley Naidoo, the Director of Business Development at Rifle Shot Performance, a business performance company. Dilley, let's now go into this crucial issue of environmental social governance. You know, those current prominent three capital letters of ESG. Is the net zero possible that this is striving for?
I'm very wary of acronyms like ESG, which becomes buzzwords and are created by consulting companies and opportunities to create a lot of work for consultation. The fact that we are talking about ESG, environmental, social governance, is a recognition that we have done a dismal job in these three areas of environmental, social, and governance. So I think that's the first positive thing, that we've recognized that we've done a dismal job of environmental, social, and governance, specifically in the mining sector. So if we look at the mining sector and the history over the last century in South Africa, it has been self-centered and largely selfish from an investor perspective. And very little recognition and emphasis has been on the environmental and the social and the governance side. Let's be frank, mining has largely been built in South Africa on the back of black male migrant labor, slave labor, if I may. And if you look at the emergence of hostels, male hostels, that still exist today, that is unacceptable from a humanitarian perspective. So mining companies need to do what South Africa did post-apartheid, which was called the truth and reconciliation, to get to grips of what happened before, where we are present, and how do we move into the future. So I believe that the mining sector and mining companies need to start doing what I will call a truth and reconciliation in this area of environmental, social, and governance, and be very honest of where you are on a scale of 1 to 10, if that's the benchmark, of where you are in the environmental area. So let's look at mining. When you start exploration in a mine with your mine plan, you should have a very definitive exit plan. And I've seen mines in South Africa that are ghost towns today. If you were conscious of the environmental, social, and governance, you wouldn't have ghost towns. You will have subsidiary industries that still exist and contribute to the workers and jobs and the economy. So if we unpack each one of those acronyms, if we look at environment, so mining has been very guilty of not doing justice to the environment or the ecosystem. The young generation of today are very, very conscious of environmental, social, and governance. So miners need to be very, very conscious, other than having a template that ticks the box and says, yes, we comply to environmental, we comply to social and governance. But seriously make this ESG as part of the social fabric and DNA of the company. In other words, the tick box exercise just becomes a formality, like you will do an audit of a company. So that should be a lived thing. It should be a living, breathing, day-to-day thing in an organization as far as the environmental is concerned.
And, you know, I'm crazy about tree planting. Could we be planting much more in terms of trees that absorb the carbon?
Absolutely. The benefit of these trees is many countries in Asia, this is what they are doing, is planting trees as a simple example of contribution to the ecosystem. On the social side, with respect, many companies is doing what I call CSI, which is charity. So you need to start looking on the social side of how your communities become part of the value chain of the mining environment. The mining companies have done a great job in terms of providing some healthcare clinics, etc., to some of the communities. And COVID was a good example of that in terms of the mining companies making a contribution. But I think more needs to be done. What I've seen mining companies do is employ international consultants and put an ESG program together. Not understanding when I go to Limpopo, there's floods, there's issues. There isn't the basic utilities of water, of electricity, of internet. So when you're putting these fancy PowerPoint presentations with the international communities, they don't understand the local reality. That needs to change, is to understand on the ground what the impact is in terms of the communities.
And do you think that, they are realizing now how important these basics are of water, of electricity, of kids having to do their homework without the internet? Do you think that is coming through?
I don't believe that investors who sit in boardrooms smoking fat Cuban cigars and expensive whiskey, or politicians really, really understand the day-to-day challenges in these communities, who are living day to day with the challenges that you mentioned. I don't think they're fully aware of it. I think there's a lot of branding and marketing of these individual mining companies. Having said that, I am starting to see more and more South African mining companies being more conscious of the communities that they operate in the environments that they operate in, and looking at the whole governance and compliance environment as the last thing, as opposed to leading with that.
And that G, as you mentioned, how is this being monitored? Who's watching to make sure business is conducted ethically? What business processes are in place?
Yeah, I think that's a big gap, Martin. Unfortunately, with a young democracy, 28 years old, I would think our institutions have been very, very weak in being able to monitor the various sectors. They're very good. The policies that they put out, etc., is where it stops. You've seen the recent incident at Jagersfontein in terms of the tailings, etc. Those things, who's monitoring that? What are the repercussions of those? And what are the precautionary measures that you're going to take that you don't have another one of these incidents? So I would say that area is much to be desired right now. It's an area that needs a lot more focus in terms of monitoring, and not monitoring after the fact. It's predictive monitoring, where things are about to happen far in advance. Many years ago, I was involved in Anglo, where we created, again, a South African innovation. I was partly involved with this with people in Silicon Valley, where on the human element side, we were trying to save lives through technology. So we invented sensors that went underground, and we could do seismic events monitoring with alarms that could get the miners out in time. This we did in 1994, and we exported this around the world, including countries like Japan, who has earthquakes. So these are kind of things that can be done, but it comes at a cost, which has to be factored into the business model of the mining companies.
Are there any countries that are models that have dealt with similar challenges and opportunities that South Africa can pursue and follow as sort of a vision?
I think there are challenges all over the world. If you look at indigenous communities and lands that are being, for exploration, etc., and disrespect of that, whether it is in South America or any of those geographies, it's similar to South Africa. So there's challenges all over. But I think the country I'll probably single out is Australia and Canada in terms of starting to do a better job in the areas of environmental, social, and governance as part of their business model. South Africa is also unique in that we are a multi-ethnic, diversified country. We're not a homogeneous society. So we have slightly different values from different communities, and we have to be cognizant of this from an education and awareness perspective. And how do we move so that our workers understand, who are at the coalface, if you will, that what does ESG mean and what are the implications of ESG for each one of you as employees in our organization? I think that's the biggest challenge, where the talk of ESG is in the C-suite and the boardroom, That needs to get to the coalface so that it's totally integrated with the same message across the organization.
And finally, how do we get a total holistic transformation approach? How do we make sure that we're looking at everything that needs to be looked at in a total holistic transformational way?
Yeah, I think there's a few things in the word transformation. So obviously, investors, funders, miners would be looking at transformation from a business transformation perspective. We invented a term called digitalization, using digitalization as a common thread. So if you look at the mining companies that are already in existence, they're doing a great job in brownfields investments, etc. But they're doing a dismal job in terms of greenfields in the South African context. Okay, so if you look at total transformation, mining companies are looking first, let's call it selfishly, at the business model transformation, including the opportunities for renewables in terms of electric vehicles, new minerals like lithium, palladium, amongst others. So that's the business model transformation. But mining companies and the mining sector need to look at a holistic view of the community, country, and environmental transformation that is built and costed into their business model. Some of the things that we already alluded to under the acronym of ESG.
That was Creamer Media's Mining Weekly, speaking to Dilley Naidoo, the Director of Business Development at Rifle Shot Performance.